And our Holy Gospel this morning is in Luke, the 2nd chapter. Glory. Now, every year, his parents, that's Jesus, went to Jerusalem for the festival of Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up as usual for the festival. Now, when the festival was ended and they started to return, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Assuming that he was in the group of travelers with the rest of the family, they went a day's journey. Well, then they started to look for Jesus among their relatives and friends. And when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. And after 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. And when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety." And he said to them, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" But they did not understand what he said to them. So then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. And his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in years, and in divine and human favor. The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Congregation may be seated. So, we're trying to survive this transition we find ourselves in somewhat with some modicum of decorum and faithfulness, and so we're looking at ways that we can train ourselves as a congregation and individually to be able to survive transition faithfully. And we look first off by saying that one of the things that makes it possible for us to survive transition faithfully is that we have to remember that it all starts with a deep-seated trust in Jesus Christ. That what God has done for us in Jesus Christ and his death and his resurrection has set us all on a path to be able to survive into the future, whatever it may behold. And the second thing we always have to remember about this future that we talk about is that although we may not know where this is going to go, it goes guided by God, who is already there. Like those disciples who were sent out 2 by 2 into places where God was intending to go. You and I are surviving into the future, survive into places where God is and where God is intending to go. And the third characteristic or value that we might need going forth for transition is what we're talking about today and what we read in this little story from the Gospel of Luke. And that is that we have to be open to new learning. And this story, just think about this story for just a second. I mean, Jesus is 12 years old. He's right on the cusp of becoming a man. He's not quite there yet. He's still a kid, but he's almost right there. Now, nowadays, in Jewish tradition, they have a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah to celebrate when a young man or a young woman transitions from this childhood to teenagehood, and which for them is adulthood. And they have a ceremony about that. But in Jesus' time, you just kind of aged into it. You just kind of all of a sudden, one day you were a kid getting around to play, and the next day you were out there stoking the engines of commerce and paying taxes. I mean, that's just how it went. Seems like for most of us, that's how it goes anyhow. And so Jesus is just kind of sitting there as a kid, and they go to celebrate the Passover. Now, the Passover is a big festival. In the Jewish tradition, if you can get to Jerusalem for these festivals, that's the preferred way to go. But of course, now with the diaspora, they're all across the world. But in those days, not all the Jews were within travel of Jerusalem. But Jesus and his family, they lived in Nazareth, which was about 90 miles north of where Jerusalem was, and it was a doable trip. And so when Jesus is about 12 years old, all the people of the village go. And it's not like just Jesus and Mary and Joseph and a few of their family went. I mean, the whole village would make the commitment. And, of course, they're almost all related anyhow, so it's the cousins and the uncles and all that sort of thing. And so as a group, they all go down there. And so they find themselves in Jerusalem celebrating the Passover, a big festival. Now, they say back in the day that in Jesus' time, Jerusalem usually had about 25,000 people. And the city was packed then, elbow to elbow, couldn't move around. During the times of Passover and other festivals, the population often rose to about 300,000. So there's just a ton of people who are in Jerusalem celebrating these Jewish festivals. And so then when it's over, they head back up the road, and they go as a group. And it takes Mary and Joseph a day or two to realize that Jesus hasn't been pulling his weight, and they're looking for him to, kind of take care of something, and they can't find him. And because they can't find him, they're like, oh, man, back to Jerusalem we go. And so they come walking into Jerusalem. It's a little emptier now. It's still crowded, though. And they spend some time looking around for Jesus, and eventually they find him in the temple, sitting at the feet of teachers, learning from them. And here's what's so amazing. Mary, of course, being the ever-duteous mom, she goes in and she says, kid, you're driving your father and I, you're making us nuts. And I don't know if other mothers have ever said that about their children, but Mary said it about hers, okay? So if you've ever said that about your kid, know that you and Mary are hung dai, as the Chinese say. You're as good as friends can ever be. Because, well, unless, of course, your kids never drove you nuts. But, good luck on that one. So there they are. He's like, and then he says, and here's the kicker. It's just like such a kid. He doesn't say, oh, Ma, sorry. He goes, why were you looking for me? Now, it's very good. This is where I know Mary is truly a very good mother, a very good parent. She should be a saint. Because most people at that stage of the game would have just sold their kid to the first Egyptian slave trader. Why are you looking for me? Oh, I don't know. Because that's what moms do. No, Mary's just like, oh, gosh, maybe we should leave you here. I'm in my Father's house. Think of that for a second. And that's the key piece here. Jesus understands that this temple that he's at, and this is a huge place, is not a temple. He doesn't say, well, where would you expect to find me but the temple or church or something like that. He says, I'm in my Father's house. I mean, he's talking to his mother. And his dad, Joseph, is standing right there. I mean, Jesus has already seen at the age of 12 and learned something about himself and who he is that gives him another parentage besides Mary and Joseph. That as much as he understands Mary and Joseph are part of his life as his mom and his dad who raise him, who feed him and clothe him, there is another father out there that he must learn from as well. And this other father that he finds in this temple for us, his Father's house for him. And so Jesus opens his heart and his mind to whatever God is willing to teach him. And that's the key piece to remember, that Jesus himself is learning. It's not like Jesus came out of the womb and knew everything. It's not like Jesus just kind of was born in a manger and from then on, he was able, to do advanced calculus. Jesus, like everybody else, learned, opened himself up to new ways of thinking and being. So that when Luke finishes the story, he says that his mother pondered these things in his heart, but he went home and grew in both divine and human favor. He grew in wisdom and years, and he grew in divine and human favor. In other words, both sets of parents began to teach Jesus who and how and what to be. And because Jesus shows us an example of being open to new learning, when we are in transition, it's vital for us to keep our minds open, our hearts open to new learning. Because what learning is basically, is seeing connections that you hadn't seen before. I mean, you've heard it said perhaps that there's nothing new under the sun, and there really isn't. But what is new is you being able to make a connection between something you had done and something you hadn't done. So, for example, a few years ago, I went to a congregation, and I was standing outside in the back as worship was beginning, and I was looking, and this right here, I don't know if you can see it for those of you, the banner might be in the way, but this candle, they had one of these candles, and they had this candle, and it was out. Now, in and of itself, a candle being out is not the end of the world. But however, that candle is called the eternal light. for those of you who are wondering. Maybe this is a new learning for some of you. That candle is called the eternal light, and it symbolizes the eternal light that Jesus is for the world. And the whole point of the candle is that it never goes out. It's supposed to be on 24/7, 365 days a year. So to be standing there at the back of the church, looking out as we're beginning a Sunday morning worship and seeing the eternal light is not lit, you got two options. Number one, somebody forgot to replace the light, or number two is Jesus left. I wasn't going to go with number two, so I went with number one. So I started asking people, hey, who usually, and just so you know, there's like these little plastic inserts that you slide in and out. It's not like we buy a new candle every time. So I said, well, who replaced this candle? And everybody's like, I don't know. So I went to the secretary that Monday morning, and I said, hey, who replaces the eternal light? And she was like, what's the eternal light? She didn't even know what it was. So I had to tell her the same thing I just told you. So I was standing there, and I was like, huh. So I went in, found an insert, lit the light candle, stuff like that. A couple weeks later, I'm talking to the pastor who had been there before me. And I said, hey, I have a question. Do you know who replaced the eternal light in the old church? And he goes, I did. I said, did you tell anybody? And he goes, I don't think so. I said, okay. New learning. If you want the eternal candle lit, that pastor ain't here anymore, so you better find somebody to do it. So that's what it means to learn, to be able to make connections of stuff that you already see and experience, right? And now to be able to see these connections in new and different ways. And as we put these connections together in new and different ways, learning expands and we move forward. And so transition then, all right, is all about being able to survive faithfully by looking to see where the connections could be or may be. We know what they have been, but it is God putting something new on us to see these things that are happening in new and different ways. And as we see these things in new and different ways, then we begin to learn, to go forward and to see what God has for us into the future, whatever it may be. So learning is vital, and being open to new learning is vital to surviving transition faithfully. Because in it you will see then that God is showing us a wonderful world, and we're finding wonderful new ways to connect up all the pieces, all the relationships, all the things that we have found part of our life. Now, it just so happens that today we're talking about learning, and also by a wonderful stroke of scheduling luck, we have Jenna Olson from University of Nebraska-Lincoln Campus Ministry. Now, she's been here before, but she represents one of the great institutions of learning, not only in our state, but in the country itself. And I thought what we could do is a way to kind of get a sense to know who she is, because if she's going to keep coming up here every 2-3 years asking us for, money and prayers and things like that, I figure we should at least know her name and maybe her birthday so we can send her a card. I don't know. So I thought what we do is I just have her come up here, and her and I will have a little bit of a conversation about her and what she's done and how she works at Lutheran Campus Ministry. So do me a great favor, welcome Jenna Olson to come on up here. Thank you very much. Did you turn your mic on?
I did.
Okay, good. Now, we've never done this before. These people are all wondering why these chairs were here, and the actual answer is because I just wanted to sit down. But, so you are, you have been at campus ministry. Did you go to Lincoln then?
I did,
Okay.
yes.
So how did you get started then in campus ministry at Lincoln?
Campus ministry is kind of in my blood, especially at the Lutheran Center in Lincoln. My grandpa was actually on the board for the Lutheran Center back, I don't know when that was, maybe the 60s. And then his son, my dad, went through the Lutheran Center when he was in college. And then my older brother, who also went to Lincoln, went through campus ministry when he was in college. And so it really wasn't a choice for me to try it out. It was kind of put on me to say, you cannot go, but you have to go to see if you want to go or not.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's how I ended up.
So
and I never left.
So for you, and really, so it was good for you. I
Yes,
mean,
yes.
in that sense, right? So you're saying that even though you kind of didn't really have a choice given your family thing, you found something valuable there.
Oh, yeah.
In campus ministry. So would you say that, I mean, one of the things that's interesting, we're talking about learning and how we can talk about it. What do you think campus ministry, what did you learn at campus ministry Well, you were there then. I mean, so you go there. It's part of. Did you do other things? You went to class actually.
Yeah.
You went to class. Good.
Yeah.
Got a degree.
Yep.
In what?
Psychology.
Oh. Changes the whole tenor of this, doesn't it, Kathy? So psychology, you got a degree in psychology.
Yep.
So you went to class, all that kind of
Yep.
stuff. But so what did you learn, though, would you say? Did you learn something? Let's put it this way, maybe. Did you learn something at campus ministry that you might not have learned any other way while you were at Lincoln?
I think there were lots of specific things I learned through campus ministry that obviously influenced my faith, but it was really just the learning of how nothing in our lives is separate from our faith. How just the deep intersection of life and faith, and that if you separate things within your life from your faith, that, you know, that's not good. And that's not what God intended. So when you separate your money and your stewardship from your faith, you start to idolize your money. When you separate your political beliefs from your faith, you start to idolize politicians or idolize, put certain values or positions ahead of your faith. And so really the idea of being guided by your faith first and having that influence all the other areas of your life, that's really what changed my life through campus ministry. So I could go through a whole list of specific things that I learned through sermons or Bible studies or people, but that was kind of the overarching, nothing is separate from my faith in my life.
So for you, the big learning going in, I'm assuming you were around 18 years old or so when you started, right? So you're going into Lincoln. Now was Lincoln? Are you from Lincoln?
Mostly, yes.
Okay, so that part wasn't strange to you. You were familiar with Lincoln and all that kind of stuff. So you didn't necessarily, you didn't have to adjust too much to that. So now you got to kind of figure out how you're going to make a significant move now into adulthood and going forward and stuff. And so if I get it right, so you're saying that by going through campus ministry, and did you go all 4 years then pretty much? You mean you pretty much went when you started as a freshman and went on? So you're saying that campus ministry then just kind of became the way in which you began to see then the rest of your, I mean that faith, let me put not the campus ministry per se, but faith actually was it. Wow, that's kind of cool. Yeah, because you want, it seems to me you want to have your faith sort of be that, if you talk about it as like a wheel, you want that faith to be the hub, and then everything kind of goes from there. Well, so now, how long have you been working for campus ministry? Because you actually are employed by them, right?
I am.
Okay, yeah. So, in other words, you just one-upped your parents and your grandpa. Because they were just like, well, we'll just go and participate, but you're like, you know what, I can do that. I can do better. I'm going to work for them.
Yeah. Yep, so I started full-time with them about 2 years ago when I graduated in 2016. So, again, didn't leave. So, yeah.
So now that you've worked with them, what about campus ministry have you learned that you didn't know when you were just there? And now I'm assuming you're traveling all across the state because there's Lincoln graduates everywhere.
Right,
I mean,
yes.
you can't,
Everywhere.
shake a dead horse and not hit a couple and stuff like that. So what have you learned about campus ministry in your 2 years working for them then?
I think the biggest thing that I've learned now that I work throughout the year, not just in the academic year for campus ministry, is the constant death that campus ministry experiences.
Death?
Death. So unlike any other congregation in Nebraska, when May 6th comes around, when graduation comes around, our congregation dies. Everyone leaves us for the summer. They either graduate and they go move somewhere, or they go on internships, or they go home, or whatever it may be. Granted, we still do Sunday night worships, and we have a horrible, horrible softball league that we're a part of.
You play softball?
We do. We're very bad.
Okay.
But for the most part, our community leaves us. And the professional staff really enjoy that for about 1 to 2 weeks, and then we get really lonely. So it's really interesting to experience a community that you're so deeply engaged with just kind of leave, just vanish. And it's really an interesting thing because we experience death in so many different ways because when students leave, often the programs that they were passionate about also leave. For example, when I was in college, I really cared about prison ministry. That was my shtick. And so I talked to Pastor Bob Bryan, who works at the state pen and leads their kind of worship services every week. And every semester, we had students from the Lutheran Center go worship in the state pen with the group of men there. And I just loved it. That's what I led. That's what I really cared about. But when I graduated, no one else was as passionate as me about it, and so it didn't continue.
Oh, yeah.
And that's not bad. You know, other things replaced it with that. So students now, you know, last year we were in dialogue with the Catholic campus ministry. We were working with the Jewish group on campus, and that's what the students were passionate about. So we often see a lot of, let's try this because this student's really excited about this program, but when that student leaves, that program often dies. It just fades away because new students come in and care about different things. And that's just kind of the ebb and flow of campus ministry. That's not bad, that's just the way it is. But we experience a lot of death in our ministry.
So you, unlike us, who are just kind of we're kind of looking at doing this transition, you know, for the next 4 to 6 months. By December, we hope to have some possible trajectories where we can go moving forward. You're basically saying, we just do this every year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Essentially.
Yeah. So it's basically transition. Don't worry about it, folks. We got it covered in Lincoln. So I find that very interesting. Then, so then something like learning, you have to be open to it because you don't know what these new students are going to bring to you.
We have no idea what we're doing the next year. We have a staff training in August where we get all the staff together and we essentially ask them, "What do you want to do this year?" And they'll tell us, and that's what we do. And it just always changes every year, and we're forced to be open to their ideas because we're not the ones driving the ministry, they are. So
that's cool. So for us as a congregation, by the way, any UNL grads here? Do we have any UNL grads? Yeah. There's a couple over there,
nice.
A couple in the back. Okay, we got a few. So what can we as a congregation, First Lutheran here, what can we do to support this ministry that is, I had never thought about it before as being this constant ebb and flow back and forth. What can we do to kind of help you in the ministry that you do at Lincoln and campus ministry? What can we do?
I think first off, send us students.
Send students. All right, those of you who have kids, and if you
send us our way. The thing about an incoming freshman is the 2 days before classes actually start, they are bombarded with every organization, club, RSO, ministry, whatever it may be. They're bombarded with everything they could possibly be involved with on campus in that 48-hour period. And it's stressful and it's overwhelming, and often students make decisions in that weekend with what they will do for the next 4 years. And so often we, as a community, spend our summer kind of reaching out to congregations saying, who are your students that are coming to us, so that we can reach out to them before that weekend, so that we can talk to them, so that they can see the building, so that they can be a part of this community, so that when that weekend comes, they can say, we're going to the Lutheran Center, like we can be involved with other things, obviously, but I want to try out this church first, so that we kind of beat the bomb that explodes on their life that weekend, and kind of engage in a relationship before they're just a name and an email.
Sure.
So that I would say is the first thing. The second thing is, our mission at the Lutheran Center is to raise up young adults to be leaders, to be Christian leaders in their communities, in their churches, and in their jobs. And that doesn't start when they hit college. That starts a lot earlier. And so I would ask you and all congregations to lift up young people in the church. not just as ushers or whatever that may be, but actually invite them into leadership. Inviting young people into leadership acknowledges that they are worth something to the church, that the church cares about them, and it often gives them a sense of responsibility for the community. And we've also often seen that when we invite students at the Lutheran Center into places of leadership, that they come to more things and are engaged deeper and just have a deeper, the Lutheran Center has a deeper impact on them because they're more engaged. And so I think really inviting young people, high schoolers, middle schoolers, into those leadership roles and giving them, seeing them as adults, seeing them as members of the congregation, and not just young people that go to youth group. Invite them to be on boards or committees, and walk alongside them. My first board meeting, I was like, what is this? What are you doing? But walk alongside them as they learn how churches work and function and what they can do to bring their new ideas and their faith into the community.
Yeah, that's just a great reminder as always.